Hello, hearty welcome to the 8th lecture of the Plural Perspectives video lecture series offered by the Postgraduate Department of English, Payyanur College, Payyanur. This lecture is based on the lesson Structural Violence and the Trans Struggle for Dignity, written by Imaan Semmalar, which is included as the 8th lesson of the textbook Plural Perspectives, Readings on Gender, prescribed for the second semester UG English Common Course students of Kannur University as Course 2A04 ENG. This is an article written by Semmalar about the hardships faced by the trans community in India. Coming to the writer, Imaan Semmalar. He is a trans activist basically from Kerala. He had his post-graduation from the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He is currently a theatre man, a writer, a filmmaker, and the co-founder and actor of the Panmai Theatre, Chennai. This theatre has come up with a much acclaimed production titled Color of Trans, which details the ways in which caste, class, and gender-based oppressions make life almost impossible for the trans individuals and the trans community in our country. Before we start discussing the lesson, let us see who the trans people are. Whenever we hear the word gender, the two terms that come to our mind are male and female. We always categorize human beings as either male or female and often forget the fact that there are individuals who do not conform to these two gender categories. We say that sex is biological, whereas gender is a social construct. And there are many individuals around us whose assigned sex at the time of birth does not match with their gender roles in the society now. You might have heard of a term in this connection, that is LGBT initially, then now we say LGBTQIA+. Actually, LGBTQIA+ is a term that is used in academic discussions as well as popular parlance to refer to all those people who are beyond this heteronormative concept of gender, that is only male-female gender. I'll explain the letters of this term. L stands for lesbian, and lesbian is a woman having sexual orientation towards another woman. G stands for gay. Gay means a man having sexual orientation towards another man. B stands for bisexual, that is a person having sexual orientation towards both male and female, both man and woman. T is transgender, and Semmalar is a transgender. So transgender means a person whose assigned sex at the time of birth does not match with the current gender roles. Maybe you are born as a male, but you live as a female. The gender roles that you perform in the society is more of a female than of a male. It can be other way also. So that is T. Q here stands for queer, Queer. Queer is used with different shades of meaning in the gender discussions. Generally, we can say that it refers to people who do not conform to the heterosexual notions of gender. Then I stands for intersex. Again, intersex is also a term which is having very wider dimensions. It's rather an umbrella term, an all-covering term that describes people who are born with any of the different variations in sex characteristics, including chromosomes, gonads, sex hormones, or genitals. A stands for asexual. Asexual is a person with little or no sexual attraction towards others. And plus the last notation, it stands for all individuals who do not belong to any of the categories mentioned earlier. You will find that all these categories are not very distinct, or they do not stand like watertight compartments. You will find a great deal of overlap among at least some of these categories. As you see, the title of this essay is Structural Violence and the Trans Struggle for Dignity. And as evident from the title, it speaks about the problems faced by the transgenders, the struggles that they had to go through to live as normal human beings in our society. And these struggles are really caused by certain structural peculiarities of the Indian society. And here the writer is talking about the difficulties faced by these people in almost every sphere of life, education, medical care, employment opportunities, etc. And he finds that, or rather he argues and asserts that these issues are not the result of the behavior or the attitude of any one particular individual. Rather, the problems faced by the transgenders are caused by the social setup that prevail in our country. This article or essay begins with a very interesting quotation taken from Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. These were the words of Ambedkar about the Dalit community, but this is highly relevant in the case of the trans community or the transgender community in our country. The lines go as follows. For ours is a battle not for wealth or power, it's a battle for freedom, it's a battle for the reclamation of the human personality. Truly, the transgenders are engaged in a struggle, rather a lifelong struggle for reclaiming their human personality, for establishing their identity, for a life of dignity in this democratic country. In the first paragraph of the article, Semmalar speaks about how structures like caste, class, patriarchy, that is the male-dominated society, or a society where the decision-making power is vested with the male, such a society, and racism function in our society by creating social inequalities and maintaining those inequalities with the support of various institutions. These institutions may be the government, it may be the educational system, it may be the family system, maybe the medical setup, judiciary, police. It can be anything like that. The institutional support often gives legitimacy. Legitimacy means it gives a kind of authenticity and approval to the practices of oppression upon the weaker sections, not only the transgenders but the Dalits, the Adivasis, the religious minorities and so. And this institutional support makes the weaker communities invisible to the general society. That means these people are never recognized anywhere, their sounds are not heard, their rights are not respected by the society anywhere. We do not even think that such people live in this country just like us as citizens of a democratic country. He says that therefore these oppressions are not to be considered as the acts of some individuals, a particular individual. Rather, each of these oppressions should be seen as part of a larger edifice, a larger structure of oppression operating in our society because of this structural inequality through different means, direct as well as indirect means. He then speaks about how the transgenders are looked at by the Indian society. In his view, the academic discourses, the academic discussions as well as the popular culture presents the transgenders either as phantasmagoric beings, that is very strange and mysterious creatures as we see in mythologies, like monsters, or as mere victims of social oppression. They are never represented as normal human beings just like us. Next, he speaks about the high dropout rate of trans people from the schools. That is, most of the trans people or the transgenders, they do not complete their school education. Even though they are enrolled for education, they do not complete their education. And he says that there are many reasons for this, like constant ridicule by the students and teachers, discrimination in the marking system, means they are not given the marks that they deserve, sexual harassment by fellow students as well as teachers, then punishment for gender non-conformity. They are often insulted or even punished for not being either male or female. He also highlights the fact that a lot of trans people are disowned or abandoned by their own family for the shame which arises from the image of the transgenders propagated by the patriarchal caste-ridden system in our society. He also observes an interesting fact that the trans women or gender non-conforming youth raised as boys are disowned more than trans men, partly because femininity is culturally seen as a sign of weakness by our society. Having been thrown out of the school and their homes, the trans people are compelled to take up street jobs like sex trade or begging. They are also excluded from all the decent employments. Here he refers to the words of Living Smile Vidya, another transgender activist working with him in the Penmai Theatre, who talks about how begging and sex trade have almost become like the fixed caste profession for the trans women or the hijras. Semmalar says that the only employment option for the trans people, apart from the street jobs of sex trade, sex work or begging, and the occasional traditional role of giving badai, that is blessing. When a a child is born or when a marriage takes place, the transgenders are invited to bless the child or the couple. Apart from this, the only employment opportunity available to them is the lower level jobs in some NGOs, non-governmental organizations that receive HIV funding. Since the trans women are engaged in sex trade and naturally belonging to the high risk group, and since they have contacts with males who come for sex work, they are often used by these NGOs as community mobilizers, and the role assigned to them, or rather the task assigned to them, is to distribute condoms to people and to create awareness among them about the need for testing for HIV virus. They are not given any middle level or high level job. There are a few NGOs, Semmalar says that there are a few NGOs that gave only at a later stage some decent employment for some of the trans people. Some were even appointed as the spokespersons of the NGOs. But generally speaking, even those NGOs do not give very respectable positions for the trans people. But in majority of the cases, the NGOs do not give a very respectable position for the trans people, and the structure, the official hierarchy or the power structure of those NGOs are really patriarchal in nature, where the upper class males always take decisions for the entire organizations. However, the power structure of even those NGOs that give such respectable positions to the transgenders is basically patriarchal in nature. So these trans people have minimal decision making power, and salary too is less when compared to the salary given to males or females. He then draws our attention to the pathetic condition of the transgenders being denied even the constitutionally guaranteed legal rights. We know that the transgenders are engaged in sex trade, and in that they undergo a lot of physical tortures, they undergo violence, and the police is most often blind to them. Even though they approach the police, they are hesitant to take up the case. Even though FIRs are filed, no follow-up investigation takes place in such cases. And Semmalar here cites an example of a Hyderabad trans woman leading a protest against the police, asking the police to make a proper inquiry into a trans murder case. Actually, she was compelled to organize this kind of a protest because earlier there were 30 petitions about the violence against the transgenders, 30 petitions on the violence against the transgenders in which FIRs were registered but no investigation took place. The hardships suffered by the transgender people is almost uniform in every Indian state. He cites an instance of Karnataka where in 2014, to be precise on November 26, 2014, 47 members of the transgender community were arrested by the police under the Karnataka Prohibition of Beggary Act, and these arrested trans people were detained in the beggars colony. See, the truth is that some of the people who were arrested by the police, detained by the police, were not even engaged in begging at that time. The Karnataka government often misuses legal provisions like the Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act to penalize the transgenders. The government even amended the Karnataka Police Act in April 2011 to criminalize the hijra community. So rather than giving legal remedy for them, they are being persecuted in the name of law by the governments. See, these people, the trans people, are often seen by the society as a polluting presence. Their very presence itself is considered as harmful or polluting as far as the society is concerned. The same sort of attitude is there towards the so-called lower caste people also in many parts of India, many parts of South India also. And in Karnataka again, if the transgender people are found engaged in begging, cases are filed against them under the Beggary Act. But religious mendicants, that is people who follow religious life and take alms or the bhiksha from others, who live on the alms or bhiksha taken from others, they are never considered as beggars and incriminated as per this law. And further, the trans women are denied housing in the residential areas in Karnataka, in many parts of Karnataka, except in slums. And in slums, the dwellers, the people living in the slums are denied access to many of the basic requirements of our life, like pure water, food, nutrition, sanitation, basic healthcare, etc. In the case of healthcare also, the trans people are always at a disadvantage, because medical science considers their gender difference as a disorder. See, it's only a difference that they are not male, that they are not female. But as per the explanations of medical science, it is a disorder. This gender non-conformity is a disorder. Though the latest edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders of the American Psychiatric Association replaced the term gender identity disorder with a more pleasant or a euphemistic term, gender dysphoria, it is still listed as a disorder in the International Classification of Diseases by the World Health Organization. Medical treatments that are specific to the needs of the transgenders are not made available to them by our society, since they are lesser in number and since they do not form an influential group. Much research is also not taking place pertaining to the specific health needs of this community or these individuals. Also, the sex transformation surgeries that are required for some of the trans people, as well as the hormonal treatments, they are high cost businesses, and if they approach the government hospitals, there is too much delay, bureaucratic delay. They cannot afford to go to private hospital because the cost of such treatments is very high. The only surgery that is accessible to them without much difficulty is a breast augmentation surgery, that is making the breasts bigger. This happens not because such surgeries are designed or intended for the trans people, rather normal women, he calls them cis women, that is women conforming to the normal gender concept of female. They are also going for this surgery in large numbers. So it is to protect their interest that facilities for breast augmentation surgeries are made available by the hospitals. Above all, these trans people, they do not get proper legal remedies for accidents happening during treatment due to medical negligence. Most often it is reported that the doctors are yet to decide whether they are male or female. Only after that their complaints can be entertained. And Semmalar here in this essay, he cites two instances, one of a Peshawar trans woman and another of a Delhi trans man who were the victims of medical negligence. The writer then speaks about the historic judgment made by the Supreme Court in 2014, giving self-identity to the transgenders. The judgment came on 15th April 2014, and in that judgment, the Honorable Supreme Court has ruled that trans people could change their legal gender markers without surgery or hormonal interventions. Semmalar says that, but unfortunately, the much celebrated progressive provisions of this judgment have not been implemented in true spirit in our country, even after the lapse of more than 5 years. Even now, many trans people are denied the right to education, employment, and medical care because of the fact that their present gender does not correspond to or does not match with the gender mentioned in the official documents like the school certificates. There is a mismatch between how they appear now and the gender mentioned in their school certificates, for example. And what is the result of this? The trans people are simply erased. They are wiped off, as in the case of other marginalized, underprivileged, subaltern people like the Dalits, Adivasis, the religious, linguistic minorities. In this article, he also speaks about the linguistic violence, that is the aggression in the use of language that is taking place against the transgenders in the country. He cites the example of the word eunuch. Eunuch is actually a castrated male, and he explains how the use of a particular word like eunuch can be harmful to the entire community. The trans people are wrongly referred to as eunuchs by the media, by the state policies, by judiciary, by the police. And the word eunuch occurs in the Hyderabad Eunuch Act, which was based on the Criminal Tribes Act Amendment of 1871, in which eunuchs among other tribes, castes, and social groups were considered criminals at birth. In 2005, that is in the 21st century, the central government introduced an E category in the passport application forms, and this E stood for eunuchs. But the central government had to withdraw this provision because of severe protests from the trans communities. because they are not basically eunuchs. Semmalar concludes the article by recollecting the exclusions, marginalization, social ostracization faced by the trans people with respect to language, history writing, medical care, housing, employment, legal system, and education. He asserts that our society hasn't become democratic and just enough to properly address the problems of the trans people. However, he is happy that many young trans people like him are inspired by the struggles and the movements for the dignity of the trans people and are coming forward to normal social life. Now let us discuss the short answer type comprehension questions given at the end of the lesson in your textbook. There are 14 questions in this chapter. The first question is, what are the structures of oppression? The answer is, the structures of oppression mentioned in the essay are caste, class, patriarchy, and racism. Question number 2 is, what is the popular cultural notion of a transgender? The answer is, the popular cultural notion of a transgender in the Indian subcontinent pendulates between depicting them as phantasmagoric beings who don't belong to either gender, linked to myths and monsters in Hindu epic, or freezing them in narratives of victimhood. The third question is, what are the reasons for the high dropout rate of trans people from schools? The answer, the main reasons for the high dropout rate of trans people from schools are constant ridicule, discrimination in marking system, sexual harassment by fellow students and teachers, punishment for gender non-conformity, etc. Question number 4. Why do families disown trans people? Answer, their families disown trans people due to the notion of shame which originates from caste patriarchy. The fifth question is, what is it that the trans women are disowned at a higher rate than trans men? The answer goes like this. Trans women are disowned at a higher rate than trans men because femininity is culturally seen as a sign of weakness rather than masculinity, which is seen as a sign of strength or courage. Question number 6. What are the reasons for most of the trans women to engage in street-based labor? Answer, lack of education and homelessness at a young age are the reasons for most trans women engaging in street-based labor like sex trade or begging. The 7th question is, What is the only employment option for trans people apart from sex trade or begging? What do they do? Answer: the only employment option for trans people apart from sex trade or begging and the traditional role of badai giving are the lower run positions in NGOs that receive HIV funding. Question number 8. What is the result of the exclusion of the trans people in employment? Answer: such exclusions result in a high degree of vulnerability, and the trans people are subjected to various sorts of violence. The ninth question: which are the legal provisions used against trans people? Answer: provisions in acts like Prohibition of Beggary Act, Immoral Trafficking Prevention Act, etc. are used against trans people. The 10th question: what was done by the Karnataka government to criminalize the hijra community? Answer: in April 2011, the Karnataka government amended Section 36A of the Karnataka Police Act to criminalize the hijra community. This amendment gave the police authority to keep a register of the hijras and their details like place of residence. Question number 11 is: are there attempts to keep public places puritanical? How? The answer is: in many places in the country, there are attempts to keep public places puritanical by freeing such spaces from the polluting presence of all people engaged in begging, including the hijras. However, this exclusion is not applied in the case of religious mendicants. Question number 12. What is understood by caste morality? Caste morality here refers to the privileges extended to the upper class and the oppressions and exclusions imposed upon the lower class in the patriarchal caste system prevalent in the country. The next question is: what are the exclusions suffered by the trans people in the field of healthcare? Answer: their trans identity is labeled as a disorder by medical science, and they are denied the medical care specific to their physical, hormonal, and psychological needs. Above all, they are denied access to pure water, proper food, sanitation, etc. Now the last question: what was the judgement or rule made by the Supreme Court on April 15, 2014. The Supreme Court on April 15, 2014 ruled that trans people could change their legal gender markers without surgery or hormonal interventions. Through this judgment, the apex court upheld the self-identity of the trans people.
Hi, my name is Imaan Semmalar, and I identify as a man with trans experience or a trans man. And I work voluntarily with this network that is called Sampurna, which works specifically with trans and intersex individuals. And we are the largest support network globally for trans-star and intersex Indians. If I were to talk about my own individual experiences with structural exclusions, I have to first say that I am someone with considerable amount of privilege. I have been raised by a dominant caste and middle class background. So in terms of access to education, it's not something that I really suffered exclusions in, because I had access to university education. However, right now, because of the mismatch in documents, especially my educational certificates, it is very difficult for me to find formal employment. So a lot of the jobs that I do right now, because I'm an unpaid activist with the movement, I feel like if you get paid for the work that you're doing for this movement, it kind of compromises your politics in some way or the other. And of course, that is coming from a position of privilege. There are a lot of my trans brothers and sisters who do get salaries and some semblance of dignity by working for trans rights, and I completely support that. But given my positions of privilege, I feel like I should not take money for this kind of work. So a lot of the work that I do is in informally online jobs. Recently, in fact, because I was unable to sustain myself with this kind of online jobs, I had applied to even call centers, and I passed through a lot of the interview rounds. And then when it reached the final stage where they verified the documents, that's when they realized that there is a mismatch, and they straight out rejected, saying that there is a mismatch in documents and we will not be able to employ you. Now, it is very difficult to prove that this is because of gender identity, because it's not given in writing. So a lot of loopholes exist where they can say, we had more qualified candidates, or you didn't fit some criteria, or your CV does not look focused enough, because I've done a lot of things all over the place. So this is one of the exclusions that I'm personally facing. Of course, it's nothing compared to the majority of trans people who face such huge discriminations in workplace as well as education sector, and also with the health aspect of it, because the trans community is a vulnerable one and we don't have much buying power as a whole. Very little funding goes into trans specific healthcare. And because of this less funding, a lot of clinics provide very poor quality healthcare to trans people. And if you were to look at trans healthcare right now, even after the NALSA judgment, you have to have 2 psychiatric certificates before which you can go for hormone replacement therapy or gender affirming surgeries. So we are at the mercy of medical health professionals who know very little about these issues, and we are in fact convincing them about what we know to be our identity from a very young age. And it's almost like you're educating them about trans issues, and at the end of it, you're really begging them to diagnose you with a disorder. Because right now, even places like the National Institute of Mental Health Sciences in Bangalore, which is a very premier institution for mental health care in India, they follow the WHO ICD, which says that it's a gender identity disorder. So this depathologization has to happen, because gender diversity exists in the animal kingdom. It's as natural as that, and just the gender diversity in the human world is not recognized because of this very rigid system of classification of gender. So after I got my certificates, I went for a mastectomy, a top surgery in Bombay. The doctor was Dr. Neeta Patel, and this is something that I have written very openly about. In my life in trans activism, there is a narrative of 5 trans men, and one one of which is my story, in which I've talked about how these kind of private clinics where doctors really don't know what they're doing really exploit the vulnerability and desperation of a community that does not have access to the service. And I had a very botched surgery that was done after I paid 1 lakh rupees, and the normal recovery period for a mastectomy is 2 weeks, but I was bedridden for 6 months. And after that I went for another correction where she said, you have some allergy with the suitors, and so she kind of said that I'll do a correction for you for 10,000 rupees, and I went back to her, which was also a botched surgery, and then I had to go for a third surgery with another doctor to get the final correction done. So totally there was a huge cost that I had to pay for a very basic surgery, which could have been done in 2 weeks time. So if you look at the NALSA judgment right now, it says that you can self-identify your gender irrespective of hormones and surgery. All you need to do is just declare yourself as a trans person. But right now, if you look at it, even after 2.5 years of the judgment having been passed, very few people have been able to change their records without the hormone replacement therapy or the surgery. In fact, even on the passport website, they still ask for a medical certificate for you to change your legal gender markers in your passport. So these are the kind of difficulties that we are facing. We also have trans men who have tried to apply in the Gazette for a gender change, and they have actually told him that this judgment is only for hijras and it's not for you. So there is very little awareness even amongst policymakers, amongst the administration regarding trans men specific issues, and we are facing exclusions because of this. And I would like to appeal to everyone who's in some position of decision making or policy making power to also include trans men, genderqueer people, as well as intersex people, because these are the more vulnerable communities. I wouldn't say more vulnerable, but less visibilized communities within the trans spectrum.
Thank you very much for listening to this video. Enjoy your studies. All the best.